Thank you for joining us this afternoon in the midst of very eventful times. We have the extreme good fortune to have with us today not only retired judge and eminent author and scholar Sandra Simms, but senior criminal defense attorney Bill Harrison, who doesn't really merit the term senior because he's barely into his 40s, if that.
Right.
Louise K, dear friend, and also a very experienced attorney, one of truly the leaders of the women's attorney movement growth in Hawaii, and many worthy causes. And today, for the first and hopefully not the last time, Rebekah Ratliff from Atlanta, a JAMS mediator, a former insurance claim adjuster with a heart and a conscience. Yes, they do exist. No offense to my friends in the defense bar, both of them. and Louise's partners, Bill and the rest. So, ladies and gentlemen, what would you like to take up and talk about today?
I'd like to congratulate Rebekah and all Georgians, well, maybe not all Georgians, but the majority of Georgians who voted and made a historic vote that then unfortunately got overrun by what happened to the Capitol. But we should not forget that a lot of work went into it and you guys pulled it off. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to expand on that just a little bit, because every one of us, and I hope virtually everyone watching this now or later, will realize the incredible, immeasurable debt of gratitude we owe to Black voters, to LGBTQ voters, to young voters, and to all those oppressed, marginalized, excluded, disempowered, disrespected voters who stepped up and made the difference, because you did. In your honor, we take a moment to thank you. Now, the question is whether what in the old days might have been called in the Deep South, where my small town northern Louisiana parents were from, us white folks, can learn anything from your good example. We hope so.
We do.
So what do you think, and that's my question for the day, what can we learn from all this? Sandra, Rebekah, Louise, Bill.
I think that we learn the power of community when we focus on the human race as a race. That's what I think that we learn. We can get further together, and nothing beats a concerted effort by decent people.
The two events of January 6th are a real contrast in the rule of law and exercising the vote and what that can achieve versus people who felt they had the privilege to be able to invade the Capitol and just cause a lot of heartache and despair, death, destruction. It did not stop the wheels of government and democracy from going forward, but it did hopefully create a lot of soul searching and self-reckoning among people of conscience.
Yeah, and I want to stop there for just 1 second, Louise, because I think what you just hit is an incredibly brilliant, deep insight. And that is, maybe for the first time in our lives, and maybe in one sense, for the first time in our history, choice prevailed over privilege.
Mm.
May that be our new direction.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. I felt that too, Louise, when I saw that Congress decided to still keep going on despite the horrors that were going on outside. That was an incredible, powerful testament to the power of our institutions. Beleaguered, battered, threatened, it moved forward and got the job done. That was there that they were there to do. I think the other side of it, I think there is a lot of soul searching going on, because I think that for many of the people that some of the people who came there, I think may have just really been sincere about doing their protest. But they were overtaken by, well, we saw what occurred and caught up in something I think that may just got totally out of hand. When you hear about people committing suicide because they were realizing the gravity of what had taken place and what they were involved in and how it was going to impact the rest of their lives, their community, their businesses, their families, I think it just never occurred to them that would occur. Of course, that's a piece of privilege as well. To think that it doesn't apply to me, that only applies to, to the Black folks and the brown folks that are out, that are out there. Yes, they have to suffer the consequences, but to think that, well, there is a consequence for taking a stance that is in violation of everything we claim to espouse, because that's what that expressed as well. That was one of the takeaways that I got from it. Which is, well, there's a lot of takeaways.
Thank you, Sandra. Heart of the matter. Yeah. Senator Bill.
Yes, I can tell you this, that in my adult life, this is the second surreal incident that I've watched. The other incident was September 11, 2001, when you turn on the TV and you see what's happening there. When I turn on the TV on January 6th, I just could not fathom that this was going on.
Yes.
And, it clearly shows the extent of white privilege in our country. Had I been knocking down a window of the Capitol building, I would have been shot, most definitely. And you see the cooperation from some of the quote unquote law enforcement officers and the dealings. Now I hear that certain Congress individuals were alleged to be involved in showing the Capitol grounds to some of these rioters and having letting people know where the speaker was and things of that nature. It's really so upsetting to watch this, and especially for a lot of us. All four of us are in the field of law, and in the rule of law, and we grew up understanding that the way to resolve conflicts, if you have them, is through a court proceeding or through mediation. So, but what we see here is just it's astounding. I was just my mouth was agape when I was watching this on TV, and just the impact it had on me. Can you imagine the children in our country, but also the national stage, international stage that this was shown on. The gravity of it is just, it's mind-boggling.
I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And when there was commentating after where people, or even President-elect Biden came on and said, "This is not America." I will have to say that I'm watching and I said, yes, it is actually. It is. Yeah, it actually is. This is America. And the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm a proud American. I clap when our troops are going through the airport, and I cry when there's a flag draped coffin. My family is military, and I feel like a proud American, and so I feel like we will, we're resilient, and I still feel like we'll be okay. But this is unfortunately the ugly wound being uncovered, the ugly wound of systemic racism being uncovered for those who still are trying to pretend that it doesn't exist or haven't seen anything up close enough to admit it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that may be, and I'm hesitant to use the term positive, but that may be maybe the positive lesson that comes out of this, is that it was there for all to see. There was no turning away. You could not unsee what was taking place, and you could not reconcile the understanding that, as Bill mentioned, had those persons breaking windows and storming the steps, in black or brown or color, they would have been shot dead on the spot.
They would still be cleaning up the concrete. They'd still be
Yeah.
cleaning the concrete from the,
And
absolutely.
and no one who's watching that can say that that's not what would have happened. So you have to confront. It's just there, like you said. This is American, isn't it? My goodness, there's no turning away. So you're either gonna have to say, yeah, this is America, and that's just the way it is, or my God, what am I going to do to change this?
And that's exactly the point, Sandra.
Where this is really, I mean, we keep saying there are these come to Jesus moments, but this is definitely a come to Jesus moment for our country.
It is, and that's a really important point, I think, to focus on. For me, as the eldest in this group, I unfortunately can add 3 more of those. This really is America moments. JFK's assassination, RFK's assassination, MLK's assassination. This is who we are. It is who we have been since before Reconstruction. There is intentional inequality for the benefit of the very few in certain categories, at the expense of the marginalized, the underserved, the oppressed, in certain other categories. And we know what those are. Finally, the conversations are being had, the difficult conversations to, as John Lewis put it, to make good trouble. The books are coming out saying what needs to be said. Isabel Wilkerson's Cats and The Warmth of Other Suns, and others. So it's time, maybe, to bring together people who have not been in contact, because I was on a book club session yesterday in which an older white woman, a lovely lady, said, I'm troubled because when I go out, how do I not be seen as another Karen? And you know what we're talking about. And some of the other older white ladies and people on the call said, well, but we know that you have an open mind and a good heart, and all that stuff. And sorry, folks, but said, look, if you don't want to be seen as another Karen, don't be another Karen. Be seen as someone whose closest friends, whose loved ones, whose nucleus, whose family is people of diversity, people of color. Be that person, and you will be seen as that person. Because if you are not, you will not. And quite frankly, you may not be. As open as your mind may be, as open as you believe your heart may be.
And you know why that is, Chuck? It's because allyship is a verb.
Yes.
It's action. It's actually giving your platform to somebody, your privileged platform to somebody who doesn't have privilege. It's actually being, and so there are people who sometimes will say, I'm an ally. And I said, well, you're an ally if I say you're an ally, because I'm in the demographic of the underprivileged at a level, or the, less privileged than obviously my white counterparts. I'm a minority. And I lived working in corporate America for 25 years, as before I started my own mediation arbitration firm. And I was microaggressed constantly. And it was mostly in the form of micro invalidation, because it wasn't really micro insults. Maybe sometimes somebody would touch my hair without permission because they were curious, but less so micro assaults, because it was corporate America and human resources kind of prevented a direct and more overt assault. But micro invalidations all the time, asking me how I got something, if I had an accomplishment. And often I wanted to respond, well, how did you get yours? I'm in corporate America working, I'm being promoted, I'm doing what you're doing, and sometimes more because I have to, because Black and brown people get promoted based on, the work that they do, while our counterparts would get promoted based on potential. So we get promoted based on performance versus being promoted based on potential. And I dealt with that for 25 years. And so it's, allyship, there are opportunities. There are opportunities to be a sponsor, to speak on behalf as an advocate for somebody who's not in the room, if you have the opportunity to do that. And it's important to take a stand. And when we talk about silence is complicit, we mean pick a side, because at this point, we went through that 8 minutes and that excruciating 8 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd's murder on TV. And so now we say silence is complicit because we mean speak up, stand up, speak up, pick a side.
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect.
And Edmund Burke was right? Evil needs nothing more than for good men to be silent. And another, I think, really critically important, undervalued, underperceived element of that white privilege is the attitude that by convincing yourself you have an open mind and an open heart, that it erases all of that. So last night on the call, an older white gentleman said, well, here we are in Ann Arbor, the bastion of liberalism in the Midwest. And I had to stop him and said, wait, that may be how you see yourself, but I guarantee you, our good friend, Becca's in mine, Betty Widgeon in Detroit, and her colleagues don't see you that way. I guarantee you, there is no Black person in Little Rock, Arkansas, who sees you that way. So I think we're going back to this lovely woman's question. If you want to really not be racist, you have to live not racist. Your choices have to reflect that you choose diversity. You choose the richness of the human experience. And the second thing I want to share real quickly is we all know and have read Heather Cox Richardson. She may be the most eloquently incisive, courageous commentator on what's happening in our times out there now. Hey, she is an extraordinarily gifted history professor at Boston University. And the thought came to me the other day, as brilliant and insightful as she is, can you imagine how much more depth and dimension she would bring to the table and to her understanding if she were a Black woman?
Like a Joy Reid.
We need to understand that.
Yeah. That's true. You got me reading her, and I am really, really deeply impressed with her thought process. But that's it. The other person comes to mind when you think about having that kind of power, that kind of perception of voice, is Joy Reid, because I've been kind of following her a bit too. She's pretty insightful.
So how do we go forward?
Have the tough talks.
What's happening here, we start tomorrow with the series that was actually spearheaded. We talk about allyship, we talk about, responding to, the things that are happening in this country. I have to give our Chief Justice a lot of credit, Justice Ratliff, for starting that, achieving racial equity in Hawaii series. It's like sort of spearheaded that following the events of this past summer, here in Hawaii. So we got this, that's going to be the discussion. We've got, 5 weeks, 5 sessions coming up addressing, Black Lives Matter in Hawaii. We're looking at criminal justice. We're looking at civil rights. We're looking at a whole variety of, issues over a period of a couple of months in these sessions. And that's the conversation that has to start. Some of you are involved in it. I know Louise and Bill are actually involved in those conversations directly as well. And that's going to be, I think, I don't know that we've ever done that here in the state. Have we, Louise? I don't think so. Not on this scale. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful collaboration. I'm so happy to see that, Sandra, that you and Justice McKenna and others were working. It's a joint effort by the State Bar Association, the Judiciary, and the Judiciary History Center. And I've been sending around to everybody in my office because it really is a topic that applies to everybody, not just lawyers. So I'm glad to see us tackling that on a multidisciplinary way. By the way, Heather, I should say this because my son is a Boston College alumnus, but Heather Cox Richardson is a Boston College history professor.
Right.
Okay.
And you got me started on reading her too, Chuck. I really love the way she connects the dots.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah, her dot connections have no interference, no disruptions. They're brutally straight and frank.
Yeah.
But they're historically based. They reflect a fantastic perspective. And I hope too, as we see that some of our new leading, most respected, most valuable authors, Isabel Wilkerson, Ta-Nehisi Coates, others, are going to change our awareness, our consciousness, and change our behavior. Because another thing that was said on the call yesterday, change the law, you change the attitude, you change the behavior. I'm sorry, but I do not have a nice way to say the 8-letter word that begins with male bovine.
We know, we get it.
You know,
you can't legislate a mindset.
No, I'll tell you what shows us that. Marlene Booth, the wife of our longtime law school dean, Avi Sofer, did a retrospective 50 years after Brown versus Board of Education. She went back out to the dirt farms in the most rural areas, the poorest areas of the South. And she asked the question, what's changed? What's different? And they said, nothing except, in a way, it's worse. And we know it is. It's more subtle, it's more sophisticated, it's more ingrained, it's harder to overcome. It's not something obvious by making a Black voter applicant recite all 26 district council people. It is something like, well, we know we can't do anything to you directly, so we're going to purge 200,000 of you off the voter rolls publicly. And they get away with it. And they get away with it because another thing happened during these 4 years that we can never let happen again. And that is Trump and those people seized control of the narrative. And the media gave it to them and fed them. That cannot happen again.
It's not. It won't happen again. It's not going to happen again. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
No.
But the thing is, we have to be conscious that it can happen again and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
And you go back in history, and you know, the Jewish people will never let us, forget what happened, and that's important. Okay, and that's what we have to do. We've seen what happened when someone like this has taken over the country, and so we have to be cognizant that it could happen again, and we have to protect against it not happening. I'm not. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just going to just say, and it's not just a white versus people of color issue too, because we all saw that in that Capitol with that insurrectionist mob were people of color in there.
That's right.
And what I've heard even in Georgia, the Asian American population, the community really got galvanized on voting, as did many communities of color. But that was 2/3 of them that voted Democrat. There's a third that support Trump. And why is
Yeah.
that? You know, we need to understand that so that we can try to win over more hearts and or just stop the delusion that people have.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well, I was
it's gonna
surprised at
take
how
some
many.
diligence.
I couldn't believe the number of Latinos in Florida. I mean, I didn't understand. It was so clear. I mean, the wall. It was just this is the strangest thing. I don't really understand where the brainwashing has happened.
Well, in Florida, you're looking at a lot of there's a lot of Cuban Americans, and so that they're a stronger influence. So they're not. We talk about Latino voters. They're not all, you know, people from Cuban Americans and, you know, Puerto Ricans and from Mexico and.
Yeah, and maybe to
You're
understand
going to
that a
see
little
things
bit.
a little bit differently sometimes. And then, you know, there's the influence of you know, the Catholic Church on a lot of very conservative points of view that come from some of the communities. And that I kind of got that piece of it. But on the other hand, I mean, not that we should all just, you know, blindly say we're all, you know, voting Democrat, but when you hear someone who espouses the kinds of things that, you know, that Trump did, and you hear the kinds of things, you know, Rebekah, in your state, the kinds of things that were being said by, you know, by the candidates, and you just sit there and go, well, wait a minute, this, you know, how can we?
Just unbelievable.
Those are the things that I think people respond to. That's troubling to me, but we just have to be very, very diligent and conscious of. Oh man, we got a lot of work to do. Let's just put it that way.
We have
We have a lot of
to do.
work to do.
Yeah.
But we can get it done because we've got these great young people coming up behind us,
And they don't bow to tyranny.
Right. So now that we're in our last minute, I give each of you 20 seconds. Last words.
Yeah, I think that what we're doing here is the start. That's the dialogue. We have to start with the dialogue, and then action comes right after the dialogue.
Have constructive community conversations.
Louise?
And be honest.
Yes.
yes.
Well, I think as Sandra said, we have 4 years to make sure that we can elect people who stand for, you know, our democracy and looking after people. And we need to understand better what moved people to believe the lies that Trump has. How can we reach them? How can we improve their situation so they see that this isn't an us versus them situation?
Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up, sum it up in 3 words, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Make good trouble.
Yeah, we're doing it.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.